And we are recording. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend this hour with us. This is about a hot and upcoming topic in not only medical education, but really in the entire business, social, anywhere world out there. It's about coaching. Now, of course, coaching for hectic medical educators and faculty looks a little bit different, but I'm really excited that I was able to pick this topic, which came out very right on time. So this is a 2019 paper, and I hope I get a really rich discussion and a lot of opinions and feedbacks out from you out there to really learn from each other about how important this can be. First, however, let's go into webinar housekeeping, and I'm turning quickly over to Wendy Herman, Head of Education and Access Services.
Good morning, everyone. For the housekeeping for today's webinar, it's the same as usual. So the video is turned off for participants, but if you do wish to turn on that feature, you can click on the Start Video button that you should see on your toolbar, which most likely is going to be up on the top of your screen if you hover over. The audio is available through computer or phone, but if you are using the phone for audio, make sure you enter in your audio PIN so that your number is associated with your login name. All attendees are muted, and this is just to minimize the background noise while we do the presentation. And please not mute yourself or put us on hold in case the hold music comes up. All of us in the webinar hear that. But you do have an option to unmute yourself. So once we are ready for discussing, we will unmute everybody. But if for some reason you do not get unmuted, you can unmute yourself. Finally, the webinar will be recorded for future viewing. So this will be the link to the webinar, or the video to the webinar, will be available on the faculty development site over at the Zucker School of Medicine website.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Mandy. So there's nothing to disclose, hopefully a lot to learn. And let's go straight to the learning objectives. So at the end of this activity, hopefully participants will be able to describe key principles of coaching and how these relate to healthcare profession education, aka to us, to describe coaching as a collaborative, reflective, and focused process due to integrating different views and also drawing from different fields, and hopefully identify opportunities for coaching for all learners at all levels. So not just faculty, but also including students. And before I tell you anything more, well, number one, I want to welcome Alice. I'm glad you're here. Hello, Alice.
Hello, it's Alice.
That's excellent.
I would like to apologize driving to Forest Hills to meet up with all of you. I'm here, and I welcome everybody to the webinar. It's going to be a very exciting webinar that Elizabeth Schlegel and Wendy have put together, and I'll be here as a discussant and welcome. So I'll be a discussant as we get to discussion questions. Thank you. Go ahead.
Fabulous. Alice, thank you very much. Glad to have you. And this is the first discussion question, everyone.
Oh,
before I'm telling you any details, I would like to hear from you out there. How many of you experienced coaching? And let's use it right now as a loose term that we heard. And also in relation, how does coaching, in your opinion, compare to giving, receiving feedback or mentoring?
Okay, currently we have everyone unmuted, so if you would like to contribute, you can go ahead and speak it either into your phone or your computer audio. If at some point the background noise becomes too loud, we'll go ahead and mute everyone, and you can unmute yourself as you participate.
Her up on your screen.
So this is really to set the stage, everyone. I'm the discussant. So everybody uses terminology different. We have coaching, we have feedback, we have mentoring, we have supervising, we have teaching, and we really just want to know if anybody's had a experience with what you would call coaching and not all those other things. And you're all unmuted, so somebody could just speak. Could you identify yourself and where you're from when you do speak?
Yes.
She had it on Friday.
Whoever has noise, please,
Dr. Kale, Alan Kale from Mather. Hello?
Go ahead, Alan.
Okay, so I have some experience in coaching, and I think it's vital and critical for faculty development. But I think we're heading into coaching, which is you're not telling people how to achieve success, but you're asking questions of the individual themselves, help them find a solution to their tasks and their own tasks that you're helping them to discover it. So it's kind of you're providing training for people or helping them to prepare for something. And that your role is, you don't say exactly how to achieve that success, but ask through questions, you're coaching them along so they themselves have the discovery of the solution to their accomplishments and success for the own path. And that I've done a little bit of Columbia University on that, and so that may vary from Northwell's, but that was the experience I've had.
Thank you, Alan, very much. So I think one of the things you said is you're not providing a solution like you sometimes do in feedback or in supervision. What you're doing is somewhat helping the person to discover for themselves things that should happen going forward as a coach, you know, very similar to improving a sport game or a musician, but really standing by somebody's side and helping them to discover for themselves with some guidance. So I think your point is well taken. So thanks for that example. Is there time for one? We really need everybody to mute everybody. If you have a lot of noise where you are, it's really not fair. We're trying to get participation, and if you have a lot of noise where you are, just self-mute. And one other person want to participate in any type of coaching they've received? And maybe it's not in medicine, maybe it's in something else, but the experiencing coaching, one other person. There's also a chat box, which I know Wendy went over, so you want to put something in the chat box later, feel free to use the chat box, and I'll be monitoring the chat box for any comments. The only comment there now is, can everybody mute themselves if they're having background noise? So whoever put that, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay,
Alice,
I think you should go on, Elizabeth.
I think we will go on, but thank you very much, Alan Carl, and that was a very important point that we're going to make, and there will be quite a bit of differentiation going on. So let's jump right in. Okay, sorry, we'll mute everybody. Okay. All right. So I can't, there we go. All right, let's go into the basics. So some tech terms that we have to look at. Number one, sure you know everybody, teacher is a person usually who helps learners to acquire knowledge, a competence or a virtue. That also might include the role of an assessor, and we have to keep this in mind. So there's very often novice-expert relationships. A mentor, as opposed to that, is usually a partner to a mentee, and usually they work in the same field and share similar experiences. A coach, however, and this is the broad term, is a person who helps attaining a goal in either life, business, or career, anywhere in any other capacity. The relationship is usually collaborative. It's a very, very strong relationship, and it's commonly between equals. I want you to keep that in mind, unless, and this goes back to our discussion just for a second, it is performance coaching. That might include fields such as sports and health professions. I will tell you what this is just in a moment. And also because we heard of it in other capacities, a sponsor then would be defined as a senior leader or a similar who uses his or her strong influence to help a protege obtain a high visibility assignment in promotion or jobs. So generally, what can we say about coaching? So this is a really powerful, collaborative, driven process with a very strong relationship with the aim to make important changes. It is target oriented. So there's always something at the other end. It is outcome oriented. It's not left hanging. And it also goes with the aim to integrating different viewpoints into one operational one. Coaching is not something that was just discovered. It's actually it has been around for quite a while. And the hallmark is it's integrating other fields, such as psychology or management or philosophy or social science. It has a strong proclivity for innovation and also for transformative learning. And what that means is it's not just imparting knowledge, but also it should be life-changing, it should be insight-changing, and it definitely should be behavior-changing. Very importantly, however, and you see here is a schematics at the right side, this is an open, guiding, question-driven process, just as we heard. And this is one important ingredient if somebody wants to act to become a coach, because one has to work up this repertoire of questions. Otherwise, the process cannot work. With the questions, a coachee will be helped along, and these questions can be objective. So what are we going to achieve? So what did you just learn? To what you think that means? And then, well, what are you going to do as the next step? Or how are you going to obtain the outcome that you desired to do? So this was a very broad overview to coaching at this point. So now we want to go into something specific here. So coaching is definitely differentiated from feedback in that it makes room for a safe relationship, for a safe environment. Both people ideally are equal. Both people agree to a specific arrangement that's being made in order to obtain a specific goal. We can speak here of reflection in or on action, either reflecting on past goals or thinking about current goals or thinking about future goals that we want to obtain. There is a lot of asking, and also there is a checkup and the progress plane. That's very important. So now we go into something though that's very often ignored. There is a subset of coaching, and this is what we definitely call performance coaching. And this includes an unequal power balance between the coach and the coachee. This might well be an apprentice or novice and a starter. So this is not the broad understanding of coaching that we have, but it is a little bit different. It will still look for the identity and the needs of the apprentice. But it looks on strong reflection on strengths and weaknesses. It might hone down on specific skills. There might be an element of assessment, clarification, but still there is shared goal setting. So it has a little bit of different flavor. It has a little bit of different teaching flavor. And where we see this quite a bit is, for instance, sports, and especially in sports, the relationship between the coach and the learner is not the same. And sometimes it might be a very autocratic style. It might not be a similar style. So we see definitely different types of coaching out there. And when it comes to coaching in the clinic and what's very often called feedback coaching, this is what we see as performance coaching. And it has a different underpinning and it has a different flavor. And just to give you also an idea, so when we look at models that are right now in the field, they are very often cyclical in nature, but they very often contain all the important hallmarks, such as setting a stage, but also performing, observation of a performance. There's an assessment, there is feedback, but there's also goal setting in a safe relationship. But I want to go back to something. Unless there is a repertoire of questions that help the coachee along, the learning is not going to happen. So this I put out from one of the models from Sargent, which I will go back in a little bit a moment. So that also showed us a whole range of very specific questions, but also there might definitely be the element of developing a specific skill. So this is not the broad coaching, this is very specifically performance coaching. So from here we ask ourselves, well, how come that we have this specific paper we're dealing with? Or and Sonadara took on a specific topic that came upon them because of developments that we see in Canadian competency-based curricula at this point. So the CanMed 2015 framework happens right now gradually. But what it also entails is that faculty are supposed to become feedback coaches. And when you look on that website, you also see, well, be realistic, you won't become a coach overnight. So there is a process that needs to be considered because it's just not that easy. There's quite a bit of information given to the webpage in Canada, but still there's always the point, it will be a conversation, it has to become an equal environment. There is a certain way of feedback giving, but there's also work observation. So this is not the broad coaching that we know, this is performance feedback. We have different levels of learner versus coach. So looking into the paper itself, what prompted the whole search of this paper was basically the establishment of the entrustable professional activities which need to be observed in order to decide if a person is ready to move on from one step to the next, which are called the milestones. And in order to coach these milestones along, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada specified faculty to become feedback coaches. Now, of course, this doesn't happen overnight, and hence the authors of this article searched the literature and did a scoping review on coaching as tools to find strategies to develop faculty development. And they also proposed a model at the end about how this can be obtained. So the methods that they used were a scoping literature review to identify faculty development for coaching out there. What they followed was what's called a PRISMA diagram, which is a very specific evidence-based minimum set of items for recording a systematic review and meta-analysis. They started out with about 2,500 items that they found, and then they will go a little bit later about the specific databases that they looked at. And after removing specific items, they honed it down to 112 articles that they based their findings on. Now I'm moving over the section a little bit faster to giving Wendy the opportunity to give a reflection on that. But I also want to let you know that the authors followed a very specific aim. So they looked for the evidence on coaching as an educational tool, because beyond the webpage, there was nothing else out there available for Canadians who want to move into CanMate and changing into feedback coaching. And what their aim was to specifically inform themselves on best practices in order to come up with a model for coaching for faculty development, which I will indeed show you at the very end. And at this point, I want to hand over to Wendy, who will talk to you a little bit more about the specific databases that were explored for this effort.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'll be going over the databases that were covered for this scoping review. But before I do that, I actually wanted to make two clarifying points. One is with the PRISMA diagram, that's merely a reporting tool. So it doesn't, although it does provide direction in how these types of reviews should be conducted, it's mainly to display what your final reporting results were. Also, another thing that I actually wanted to emphasize was that the article seemingly at kind of the initial read-through looks like they're focusing on this scoping review, but it's really the research project itself was a two-pronged project in which they conducted a scoping review first to get a lay of the land when it comes to faculty development and coaching. And then from the results, they decided to create a model. So on with the databases. So with the scoping review, they searched for databases. One is Ovid Medline, the other is PubMed, Embase, and Cochrane. They also explored gray literature sources. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, gray literature merely means anything that is not officially published in a journal or a publication. So that includes conference abstracts, website data, newspaper articles, etc. They, as an example, they actually hand searched the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada website amongst other websites as well that were actually Canadian based. They also did what's called hand searching. And so what they did is with all of the articles that were included, they also hand searched the reference lists from all the included articles to see if they can catch anything that were not caught by the search strategies. They had several inclusion-exclusion criteria. They decided to exclude any literature that did not describe any sort of outcome. So that includes editorials, opinion pieces, etc. They excluded full text, they excluded the citation if the full text was not available, which I'll actually go back to when we talk about the limitations. They also excluded information that they thought was redundant. So I'm kind of going under the assumption that they consolidated articles that pretty much talked about the same thing. They also limited it to just English only articles. So before we proceed, I just wanted to briefly orient you on the differences between a scoping and systematic review. This is just to inform you what the differences are, because in certain cases, these types of reviews are, the labels are used interchangeably, which they should not, because they are very different. So with the scoping review and the systematic review, in terms of the methodology, they're very similar. The biggest thing, though, is when it comes to the appraisal phase, as you can see on the screen, with the scoping review, a formal quality assessment is not required, as opposed to a systematic review, a quality assessment is required. So based on that appraisal piece, the synthesis also starts to differ a bit as well. With systematic reviews, typically it doesn't say on this particular table, but the synthesis really is among articles that are similar in methodology. And when it comes to scoping reviews, it can typically be just the narrative synthesis as well. So they may not be looking at the methodology, any quantitative information. So the final synthesis may start to differ between the two types of reviews. So limitations. These limitations are actually not mentioned in the article. These are things that I've picked out while reading the methodology in the whole article. The search strategy seemed to need some work. Without going into further details that may make you glaze over, the search strategy's use of the Boolean operator and, as you can see here in the highlighted sections, they included and medical education and competency-based medical education, which to me seems a bit redundant, and also limiting. Another thing that I noticed in the methodology was the lack of parentheses. So this may be an editorial oversight, or it may be the fact that they didn't use parentheses. As you can see here in the example, just by rerunning the search strategy with and without parentheses, and this is just as an example in PubMed, without parentheses, there are 869 results that come up. With parentheses, there is only 5, which is a huge discrepancy. So depending on whether they use parentheses or not, which based on their Prisma of a total of over 2,000 articles, I have a feeling that they didn't use parentheses, but that does make a huge difference when someone is potentially trying to recreate this particular strategy. Other limitations, we actually talked about this in the last month's Journal Club, but the authors decided to exclude citations that were not available in full text, which is incredibly limiting, just simply because of logistical issues in which they can obtain the full text. So if possible, it would be best if one were to not exclude just because they were unable to obtain the full text. There are various methods in which you can obtain it legally. They also, another limitation that I briefly mentioned was redundant citations. Scoping reviews aren't as rigid as systematic reviews or meta-analyses, but when it comes to consolidating citations, because the article seemed redundant, is really bringing in a bit of bias, because you're essentially calling whether it's the same citation or not. So it's something that you might want to be leery about before you start removing citations because of its redundancy. Another thing to note is that they did not search databases outside of biomedicine or the sciences, which is actually incredibly limiting, given the fact that they divided up their final results by various categories, one of them being the theory of coaching. A lot of theory articles, or even coaching literature in and of itself, may not be all-encompassing or captured in entirety through biomedical or science databases such as PubMed or Embase. So that really limits you in terms of the type of coaching theory articles, kind of groundwork type of articles that you may be able to capture from the databases that were used.
All right, thank you very much, Wendy. And to my audience, I just want to let you know that I do have my own article collection as well that I consulted, and I also consulted a coactive coach from Toronto to make sure that whatever might not be represented here, whatever might need to be represented, was in fact added here into my discussion. Okay, so before we move on to the next discussion question, however, let me report to you what the authors indeed found. And there were a lot of important findings and highlights that we need to consider in terms of coaching. First of all, it was confirmed, and we know that coaching improves self-performance, well-being, self-regulation, self-efficacy, resilience, and goal attainment. And this is not just for medical education, but this is certainly true for business, for management, for anyone who works with a coach. However, the role of the coach is pretty new in our field. While it's very well established in sports or in music. And as I mentioned before, there are even different styles totally accepted in sports, such as the autocratic or the more democratic style. Coaching in medicine is collaborative, absolutely. There is feedback and assistance with performance improvement, goal setting, solution development, and self-directed learning. And going a little back to some opinions that we heard, it is true that we help the coachee along to define their own solutions. However, since this is a style of performance improvement, it is definitely important to hone skills and be crystal clear that everything is up to a high standard after the coaching has concluded. Also, one last piece, there are long-term or short-term relationships possible between coach and apprentice, and this is rather unusual, I would say. So especially the short-time relationship in coaching is definitely specific for medicine, and I will show you an example in a little while. Something that I also noticed that comes up, especially when you go through the references that the authors used, there is something that they call augmented feedback. Now, interestingly enough, usually augmented feedback means that you simply use a source from outside, such as a swimming coach or, I don't know, a sports coach, to tell you about a specific technique. In medicine, I found augmented feedback to be provided with additional information to get a specific task right. So this is also something, and it seems to be on the scale between coaching, between feedback that only includes sharing facts to building a relationship that includes coaching. Augmented feedback seems to be right now ranging in between the middle, which includes specific instructions on how to improve performance, where helpful feedback needs to be shared, it needs to be timely, behavior specific, focused, and educational, which are all the hallmarks of traditional good feedback. But we also have to say coaching supersedes mere feedback, because the coach assumes here a leadership role, empowering the coachee. Now, I also want to make one point. We are working here in the medical sciences or in the medical field in a high octane environment where everything moves very, very fast. So assuming to just sit back, have a cookie, and providing an arena for an hour for coaching is simply not possible. Everything has to be very fast, very to the point. So coaching might indeed just leave out certain aspects of the traditional coaching to get to the point and really move the learner very fast from point A to point B. Now, the authors, of course, because this was the aim of the paper, think about how to implement faculty development. And as you can see here on the left side of my slide, these are all the core principles of adult learning. And the authors are very clear that not only has this to be included when such a faculty development program is being offered, but they also make the stretch and confirm that learning theories and andragogical principles are indeed part of the entire coaching system, which includes a person, which definitely sees the motivation of a person, is focused on specific problems, and really observes all the core principles of adult learning. Possible arenas where faculty development could work for coaching would be, for instance, small groups with case-based learning, but with the impetus possibly on real yet anonymized learner feedback, because in coaching, the feedback might be completely unanticipated. We need, of course, space for reflection. It is very important, and we heard this already from task development and deliberate practice, the deconstruction of tasks for coaching. We might need templates, and again, I go back to a repertoire of questions simply to move the coaching process along, and acquiring of these sample phrases. One idea was also proposed, which I think might be a very good idea, that actually comes from the cognitive apprenticeship model from business coaching, which simply might inspire to team up with an already seasoned coach to show and to share what student behavior might be around and how could faculty be guided through a coaching process, also to reduce cognitive load and really move a learning coach along to become a coach themselves. It might be very useful to practice with phrases and to practice with vignettes, and again, to deconstruct specific phrase development for deliberate practice. The authors also have an idea to say, well, keep it formal, make a nice environment when you teach somebody how to become a coach. Perhaps add coaching faculty development to existing meetings or existing realms. They even talk about a station rotation practice for coaching, which might be an interesting idea. And of course, the aim for a community of coaching practice through sharing coaching libraries out there in an open access environment. And I'm stopping here for a second because now we want to go back and talk a little bit to bibliometrics.
The bibliometrics for this particular article is not as robust compared to the articles that we've discussed in the past, but this is probably mainly because it's a fairly new article published in 2019. There was one citation back to this article, and the citation is located here on the bottom middle of the page. It's an article through Medical Teacher. One thing I do want to mention is that there were 14 tweeters who mentioned this particular article in their feed. And the number of tweets, number of followers that these 14 tweets reached were over 50,000. And then there were also 12 saves or 12 readers on Mendeley that saved this particular article. I've mentioned in the past that this number is actually more pertinent or more of a strong indicator on whether this article will be cited again by another article compared to social media feeds. So there were 12 users that saved it in their library for Mendeley. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the product Mendeley, it's a bibliometric citation software. It's similar to EndNote, but it does have a social media or social component to it. In which you can share citations and whatnot that EndNote typically you can do, but it's not really geared towards the social aspect of citation sharing. And this is just a brief map of the distribution of who accessed this article, and this is the highlighted blue areas are an indicator of how many people have accessed this article through Altmetric.
All right, thank you very much. And now I would like to open the stage again to my audience out there. So now that we heard a lot about coaching, assuming you're being trained to become a feedback coach yourself, what would be for you the most important aspect or skill you would like to be trained on?
And just for logistical purposes, we will not unmute everyone due to the background noise. So if you are interested in participating, please go ahead and unmute yourself and speak. If you feel more comfortable typing in your feedback through the chat box, please, by all means, we are also monitoring that, so you can use that mode of communication as well.
Would you unmute me?
Yes, Alice, you are unmuted.
So I just want to take a minute back. Elizabeth presented a lot of information from this article in the results section about coaching. And I do want to get some idea of what you want to be trained, but does anybody have any comments on everything she said about coaching, especially for people working in the clinical environment? Does anybody have any comments about this concept, best practices she's presented from this article? And if you'd unmute yourself to speak, that would be great. So Shana Sananguetti said how the skills she would want, she's answering the question on the screen. And Shana is a past Zucker School of Medicine inaugural graduate, and now she's an attending in neurology. Pretty exciting for us. And she mentions how to formulate constructive feedback. Amber Chess mentions how to give effective feedback while being empathetic. So this is interesting because we're all going to feedback, and the concept of coaching is connected to feedback, but it's also much more of a developmental process that you help the learner to see where they are and help them progress. And the feedback might be part of the coaching model, but the skills to do coaching, I think empathy is a very important skill that Amber brings up. And that's where we're trying to distinguish the difference between giving feedback, which is a process that's very important, but being a coach.
So Alice, just to chime in, I think this is very, very important. And I want to make sure, especially in performance coaching, nothing is taken away from feedback. So it can definitely not be a situation where you observe something, right? And then you leave completely the learner alone and figuring out by themselves. This is definitely not the case. So effective feedback is still be a very important part of that. And thank you very much for bringing that up.
Right. So does anybody have any comments on this? Besides, obviously, feedback that's constructive with empathy is an important part of coaching. But what are some skills you feel you need to be more effective at coaching based on some of the best practices Elizabeth mentioned? This is audience participation time, just to let everybody know.
Maybe I can add something specific. Do you believe there is the time to add other aspects besides just mere skill feedback?
Or just comment on coaching in the environment. What do you think about this concept?
Hi, this is Shayna. So I think, as far as my understanding of coaching, I think it's not a matter so much of time during the day, but it's sort of formulating like how exactly do you guide your learner without stepping into that realm of I'm going to tell you what to do, like keeping it open and sort of more of a guiding force rather than I'm going to tell you this is the answer. It's hard to like keep it in that realm and separate the two.
And why do you feel, Shayna, thank you for your comment, why do you feel you have to tell people what to do?
I think one is because people are not used to the concept of coaching, unless, because it's such a new concept, right? And a lot of our students don't come from that background of knowing what coaching is. It's different if, let's say, I went to a Hofstra student perhaps, and they may have more of a concept of it, but certainly outside of a lot of schools, especially residents now who have maybe had more of a traditional training, they're used to being fed the answers. And so they're waiting for that. And they're just like, okay, well, just tell me what to do next, you know?
So I think this is a very important point. It is the culture change.
I think it's interesting that you say the Zucker students might be more experienced with coaching, because we do have coaching in the first stages of medical school. So they do have an experience with coaching in their PEARLS, case-based learning group.
Right.
Where people who have been through curriculum where there's no coaching, this might be more complex. So I think that's an excellent point. And I think it is so important to get away from that concept you said of telling people what to do, because it doesn't stick that way.
Right. It's very true, and I've seen that happen over and over, because you can say the same thing over and over again, and you ask them a few days later, and it's not going to stick. It's the same thing, almost like with lecturing, that you have to have more participation, and it's sort of like getting that participation from them and kind of getting them involved and active in their own learning process and their own coaching process.
It's Al Kale again. I'm unmuted. Is that okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, go ahead.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think the challenge for a busy clinician, whether you're on the wards, et cetera, is, again, that said, it's hard. You have to stop yourself from saying what you would do and ask what people would do. And I found that coaching actually works. I just found it was much more effective one-on-one, and to have a dedicated time. And when you look at most coaches, whether it's for business or whatnot, it may be a phone call dedicated, but if you don't have that dedicated time period, that obviously may have to be very flexible, time limited, set some goals, reason, let's continue this, and working with somebody where they know you care about them. You have cognitive, emotional, empathy, etc. That it's not something that with a whole team grounding on a patient, I can't imagine being an effective coach for you're usually working one-on-one. And even in sports, I mean, there'll be, some coaching, inspirational talking, getting people to think a certain way without telling them, and you want to empower them. But I think it's best to start with practicing it, initially starting out, to do it one-on-one. That's probably best for the person learning to coach as well as the other, the recipient, the coachee, if you will.
Thanks, Alan. I just want to go back, and everything you're saying is so true. So you're a more senior person. So I'd like, if anybody's on the phone who's a little more junior or somebody, what would you need to enable you to be a coach in the clinical setting? Because this will be a transfer or a realignment of your skills. And if we don't understand what you need, it's hard to provide it in faculty development. So from somebody who's less experienced, who has some psychological safety here to talk, what would you need to become a better coach? And I'm in a room right now in Forest Hills with a beautiful view of Queens, I must say. It's quite impressive. And I'm looking at a bunch of young people in front of me, and one of you could speak up as well about what could we do to help you enter the world of coaching, not to become a coach, but enter. Any thoughts on that?
We can do this all about Lola from Forest Hills. Just looking through.
Could everybody hear her? Could everybody
There's
hear?
a lot of background noise.
Yes.
Background noise. We have no noise in the room at all.
If they can speak closer to the audio device, please.
Hi, everyone. So,
Thank you.
I think culture change as a from the post that really comes out to me from that article is the fact that you go by the agenda of the coachee, not just your agenda. So a lot of us as faculty, we're going by, I'm teaching this on what I think I want to teach. But where is the learner? At what stage are they? Where, what are the things on their agenda to learn or things that they want to gain? And this is collaborative. This is not something that you're just going to say, go based on what I think you should learn, but really more understanding where they're coming from and where they need to get to and how we're going to guide them to get there. So I think for us as faculty, I think a lot of the, training as far as differences between being a teacher and being a coach. Differences between a faculty, a physician versus being a coach, really trying to teach someone or help someone to get to their goals. So how to identify the goals for each of the coachees, I think we won't be able to start at all.
I think that's an excellent point, and I don't think every faculty member is a coach. I just want that to be clear. I do feel there's some faculty who will be coaches and some people who will be maybe more the feedback people, and then somebody who's more the teacher, because not every teacher is coaching. So to me, a coach is a long-term relationship developmentally with somebody. You don't just pop in at a moment and coach them. You pop
Right,
in moment and teach.
And Alice, I take it from here right away. You're completely right. And I believe people should not be made into something that's not their nature. Some people's nature might be fantastically brief, didactic, like a TED Talk, and other people might just naturally be born coaches. So it really depends on the person. Everybody should be exposed to all the gamut that's out there and all the plethora that's out there to interact and to perform and to teach people to perform and to change. But not everybody is probably really open to all kinds of different skills. So nobody should be forced to do something what they are not. So you're definitely right on that. Now, I suggest, in the interest of time, I would like to move on.
Elizabeth, I just want to conclude this.
Yes, go ahead.
That if people do have a desire to become coaches, they have to proactively seek development. And that's something we would need to know so we could formulate something. And I just want to note in the chat box, Amber Chess said clear expectations for the learner on what the coaching process is and differentiate this. I think that's very important. So thanks, Amber. Go on, Elizabeth.
Excellent. Thank you guys very much. This is really very important information for us, and do take notes here. Okay, so let me just briefly show you the published models that are already out there, and also that the authors of this article mentioned. The first of it is actually Gifford and Fall, which was published in 2014, but with an inception between 2007, 2008 from Dartmouth College. This was a residency coaching program with the same hallmarks that we already said. You might recognize this cyclic schematics from a previous goal. But this is moving a relationship, goal setting, formative feedback, coaches assessment. But as you just mentioned here, all of these individual steps might need to be deconstructed. And it might be certain that a person who really wants to become a coach understands what needs to be learned and what entails it, what is part of that. Setting the environment, deconstructing the expertise, right? And then moving on with observing learner behavior, but also co-designing the plan with the learner. So this is really a very collaborative approach. And again, if you never experienced that, it is really very new. And it is something that can be learned for people who really desire to want to do this. I'm moving on from here to a model that's actually very well known. And this is the R2C2 model, what really means relationship, reactions, content, and coaching. And again, they build rapport with a person that they want to coach. They explore the reactions. They also explore the content. So this is definitely about changing and skill improvement. And then they coach for change in order to make sure that whatever is new is implemented. And I'm moving from here to a model that you probably all know very well, which actually informed the next model. And perhaps, Alice, you want to chime in here, because this is our very own SFED model of feedback and coaching that we have been using. Alice, maybe you want to take a moment.
So we use this model. We've labeled it SFED. Actually, there's a reference at the end of the PowerPoint on
Hi, Alice. Would you mind talking a little louder? We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this came, FED, feedback, encouragement, direction, a number of years ago in the family medicine literature. I added the S for self-assessment. And it's really a very similar model to the Ask, Tell, Ask model, where you ask somebody to self-assess. That's the first step. The learner speaks first, then you have feedback and facts, and then of course you respond with encouragement and show confidence so the learner feels that they're going to be able to improve, and then you ask them to think of direction for improvement, and then you agree on a direction. But the learner is involved in that direction piece as well. So there's a bunch of questions that underline this out of time. This is something we've been doing at Northwell for the last 10 years since I got here. And it's a developing model because I'm overlaying this with the Ask, Tell, Ask model, which is commonly used, but we call it self-assessment, feedback, encouragement, and direction. And to me, the encouragement piece, the responding piece is very, very important. And this is on my website. And those questions that are there are questions people should be practicing. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So the next model looks very complicated, but I think the most important point here is that it acknowledges that there are different time frames. So this is a workplace model where coaching happens in the workplace, when some of these connections will be very, very short-lived and others will be very, very long-lived. Now, this is the model that right now the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons puts out there as a coaching model to help prompt their members to learn how to be a coach. But again, at the same time, they take into account this is not something that you will pick up overnight. It needs to be learned, it needs to be practiced. And I wholeheartedly agree what we hear here, that coaching might not be for everybody, and nobody should be really forced to do that. And in the interest of time, let me move on here to the model that the authors actually propose, which is what they call the coach to coach model. And what happens here is, and this is also something that we heard from our audience, this is an intimate relationship between two different coaches. So it's really two people that share and cultivate and observe and obsess. So these are really two coaches that enter a peer-peer relationship where they collaborate on setting the goals, on receiving feedback, on their own coaching activities, and continue to improve, cultivating this behavior and really including it into their life, into their own coaching other people to perform better and better. One key is the mutual respect and the desire for feedback. And of course, with the point wherever performance improvement goes on, where they have a partner to mirror off specific behavior and become better and better.
Elizabeth,
And-
I think this is a very clear model, and I really like it. So I think it's interesting.
Alice, sorry, it's really hard to hear you. Maybe you're far away from the device.
No, I'm right at, I could be in the device if I was supposed to.
Don't.
So I don't know what to say, but maybe
Go
I'm
ahead.
close. I think I'm better. I'm a little away. So I just want to say the key word on this model, and I love this model. So they came up with a model after they did a lit review, is the word observe. Without observing, you can't do coaching. And I just want to stress that. Don't attempt any coaching without observing. This is not a hearsay operation. So I'm going to stop at that out of time. But that word, I love this model that they came up with, and it's very interesting to do research to come up with a model after a scoping review. So I congratulate the authors on that. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And we are basically coming to the end before I will ask one more question. So our key point summary is coaching can be effective, and it has been shown to promote well-being, self-regulation, self-efficacy, resilience, and goal attainment. It is especially important right now for the novel CBME curricula that's aligned with the APAs. There is a hallmark of collaboration with a learner-centric novel approach, and we all will have to learn that. It's not something that we just pick up, but it increases self-awareness and personal responsibility of both, I would say, the coach as well as the coachee. We will need faculty development, however, to make this necessary. And also there's online materials available. We still need feedback on what really works in faculty coach development. And last but not least, as Alice said, a very, very important point was don't observe before you attempt to coach. It would not be on solid ground. It would be something that just doesn't make any sense. The authors have shown us how to beautifully conceptualize such a model. And before we close today, I want to take a couple of minutes and finally ask a last question to the audience. So assume that faculty development would be designed for you. And of course, we think about our audience out there and of new programming that makes sense. So assume we would offer specific faculty development for coaching. What type of program would possibly work for you and your faculty? Let me know and they will take notes.
And just to say, when Elizabeth says type of program, logistically, as you know, online, face-to-face, on, you know,
anything. I give you an example maybe to help you along. Right now, I'm really in person going to faculty and coach them, help them to give large group sessions specifically for the Sackler School of Medicine, and has been shown very effective.
Right, but the difference here would be that if something was on site, it would have to be in the clinical setting.
Correct.
With the cooperation of the clinical team. So
correct.
With this, you know, for the venue that this would be relevant to. So we have to think about that. Just out of time, I want to close up because we're approaching the end of the hour. Could you advance the slide? If anybody had anything to say, just unmute yourself. The other thing you could do is you could write it in the could write the feedback you want to give us in the evaluation form. So Elizabeth would like to thank her friend who helped guide this presentation, and I thank her friend as well, Mary Grogan. So you can move on from that. And it's really important that you fill out the Survey Monkey. And in the Survey Monkey, if you want to tell us some things about coaching that you want more on, or logistics or anything, please let us know. We have our next journal club. We take December off, thank God for me. And we have Tuesday, January 14th. Now I'm teasing, but it's good to have sometimes a little break, and the holidays make December very busy. So we go to Tuesday, January 14th. I'm very, very excited about this journal club, as I was about the one today. And it's an article in Academic Medicine on procedure skills teaching and cognitive load. John Young, who is a cognitive load expert at Northwell, he's vice chair of education for psychiatry and program director. Hopefully he will be our discussant on this article, and Justin Well, who wrote the article, will be presenting, and he will be presenting from San Francisco, and hopefully many people at Northwell will be listening to him, and he is really an expert in this area of procedure skills and cognitive load. So complete the Survey Monkey. You'll get the PowerPoint post-session. We mail that to everybody, and the link for the Survey Monkey will be active for you to give us some feedback. Any last comments from the audience before we close up?
It's Al Kale, but I'm with my hat on getting the young faculty who've not been trained or coached, so they don't have any experience coaching, other than perhaps sports or other music, etc. But how do you, since it's certainly not required, we talked about whether this is trait or learned, and how do you, from a andragogical point of view, get the what's in it for me? How do you get the faculty engaged and interested in learning how to become a coach? I would think that that may be a challenge too. Obviously, you'll be more successful with those who truly want to learn how to improve their coaching skills. But have you have any sense of the number of folks who are interested to do that? Because at the GME level in residency with the clinical responsibilities, it's different than when you're taking time off with a first or second year medical student, for sure.
I think, Alan, in answer to your question, somebody would have to want to take this on as a personal professional development project, and wanting to put in time after hours to do this. I don't think that there's a
So I think by targeting those folks, that's going to be the best opportunity and most efficient way. And then perhaps the people will model after them, and then help grow the faculty who want to develop skills. I think it'll be a positive snowball effect, hopefully.
Right.
That's, yeah.
Most things that you do in life that are important to you, you do after hours, and this would have to be. So on that note, I'm going to close it up, and I want to thank Elizabeth and Wendy for a very thorough presentation of this article. I hope all of you understand that you must understand the difference between scoping and a systematic review. When you read them, they have different intentions, and they're very hard articles to use, so I appreciate Elizabeth taking this on and preparing this very detailed presentation for her, and Wendy being a partner in crime. Everybody have a wonderful holiday season from Thanksgiving through Christmas, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the dead of winter, January, for the next Journal Club. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.